Being someone who's lived in a cabin in the woods myself, I can surely tell you it's one of the creepiest ways to live. But living off the land, being away from all the hustle and bustle of a city, can definitely have its rewards. These subscribers share their creepiest experiences while visiting their cabins in the woods. These stories freaked me out, and I'm sure they'll freak you out. If you have a story that you'd like to share on a video, be sure to send it to the email or the website that you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your tales of terror. First off, I just want to say that this story is a bit anticlimactic, but I hope you still find it interesting. Back in the early spring of 2018, me and my dad decided to spend the Saturday at our cabin in Wisconsin, which is about a 2.5 hours drive away from where we live in Minnesota. All the snow had finally melted, so we decided that it was a good time to go and check out the place. We do this every now and then to make sure the place hasn't been damaged by any people, bears, or weather. One winter a few years ago, when part of the roof caved in under the weight of the snow, we had to fix it. But the roof has been fixed since then and has been holding up ever since. Normally, when we are there, we get a lot of work done, but this time we decided to relax the day away, listening to country radio and talking about how many different things we always do. Whenever it got a little quiet, or when my dad decided to do something, I started to listen to the music on my phone while browsing the slowed down internet. This pretty much went on the whole day. There wasn't really much to do out in the middle of nowhere. Eventually, nighttime rolled around. We had just finished up eating, and we usually watch a movie at this point, but we forgot the CD player, so we just talked for a while and went to bed. Unfortunately, I've had insomnia for years, probably for most of my life. I don't remember how long I was lying awake. I was just staring at the ceiling and would eventually roll over to stare at the wall. It doesn't take long for my dad to fall asleep and start letting out his loud snores. I'm not sure how he does it. At some point during the night, I heard a few cat meows outside my window. I thought about it for a few seconds and wondered why I was hearing a cat meow in the woods out in the middle of nowhere. I got up and looked out the window and started scanning the yard that was lit up by the house light. I never saw any cats. And after looking out the window for a few minutes, I just started to think about how creepy trees look at night when a little bit of light hits them. They go from brown to this dead gray color, and without the leaves, the branches look like a mangled mess. Maybe it was just me freaking myself out. I decided to go back to bed and try to fall asleep, but for some reason, I just couldn't. I just kept thinking about it. I figured that it was probably a cat, but what if it wasn't? Again, we were in the woods and many miles away from any town. Then I started thinking, what if it was someone or something trying to lure me out? Normally, I am the type of guy to go investigate noises. I take security very seriously and sleep with a German Shepherd and a shotgun. But since the woods kind of scare me at night, I decided not to go check. For all I know, it could have been some sort of scary creature. When I looked up my experience on the internet, the first thing that popped up was a story of someone following the sound of a kitten in the woods, but when they got closer to the meowing, they heard heavy breathing and footsteps nearby in the darkness. After reading that, I'm definitely glad I didn't go out there and check. And apparently, from other stories I've read, Wisconsin is no stranger to sightings of other terrifying and unknown things. When my great-grandmother had her first child, my great-grandmother was living in Asheville, North Carolina, in a tiny one-bedroom cabin built by her husband. The cabin was in a secluded area in the woods down a dirt road. They lived a quiet life. George worked and Harriet stayed home with Ethel and cooked and cleaned like every other woman from that time period. The layout of the cabin is sort of important here. The cabin had a big open room where the kitchen and dining area was sectioned off, and then there was a wall dividing a small space where Harriet and George slept. The front door was close to the kitchen, and beside the kitchen there was a door that led to the only actual bedroom, which was Ethel's room. There was also a washroom behind the dining area that contained a very small closet. One typical June evening, Harriet was doing chores around the house as it began to get dark. She laid my 5-month-old grandmother down to sleep for the night after feeding her. She had a pork roast in the oven and potatoes on the stove, and mixed with sweltering southern summer humidity, she decided that she would open the front door to cool down the house a little bit. George would be getting home very soon, and she was sure he'd feel much better to sit down and not feel like he was in an oven after working in the heat all day. So she opened the front door and let the meshed screen door open to keep the bugs out. She carried on cooking and decided she was going into the washroom to wash up a bit before dinner. All of a sudden, she heard what sounded like the door shutting very loud behind her. At first she thought it was George, but when she went out there, no one was there. She figured she had just thought she heard something and went back to finish washing. A few minutes later, she heard the distinct sound of Ethel's crib rocking at a steady pace on the wooden floor of the cabin. She dressed back up, walked into the kitchen. She could still hear the crib coasting back and forth. George?" she called out in a mildly hesitant voice. She felt as if something was off, but she just knew it had to be her husband, because he was due home any minute now. She began to slowly walk towards the baby's room, the unwelcoming feeling of dread making itself known to her. She said that she opened the door to the room, and as soon as she pushed it open, the rocking came to an abrupt stop. There in the dimly lit room was a tall, matte black figure. It was so tall, in fact, that it was slightly hunched over to keep from touching the ceiling, which according to my great-great-grandma was about 7 feet tall. It had long arms that seemed almost too long for its body, and its face. Oh God, its face, as she said so many times recanting the story to my grandpa. Its face had no real distinctive features other than 2 white eyes and a mouth full of sharp teeth, curled into a sickening grin. Its fingers were long and had sharp nails and claws on the ends. It was frozen, just standing there smiling this terrible smile at her, with its hands curled around Ethel, who oddly wasn't making any noise at all. She said it felt like an eternity that they stood there with their locked gazes, but in reality it was a matter of seconds when she screamed and started shouting the Bible verse, "The Lord is my shepherd." The thing dropped my grandmother, tore out of the house at an unreal speed. Harriet ran and slammed the front door and locked it. She made damn sure it was really George when he came knocking, wanting in when he got home about 15 minutes after the whole ordeal. She said it was the scariest thing she ever experienced, and she never knew what exactly to make of that encounter, but she always said it was nothing of this world, that she could feel its intentions were of no good. She never told anyone except my great-great-grandpa, because back then, talking about that kind of stuff was taboo, and people would think something was wrong with you, that you were either mentally sick or maybe even spiritually. But that's not the last she heard from this creature. A few weeks after the incident, they acquired a dog to keep guard of the property because Harriet was so shaken by the event. One night, while in bed, both Harriet and George heard the dog going crazy outside on the front porch, snarling and growling, which soon subsided into whimpering and then silence. George got up and went to go grab his trousers and his shotgun, but was stopped in mid-action by the sound of the doorknob being twisted slowly back and forth, then violently followed by loud scratching at the door. He grabbed his gun and yelled for whoever it was to state their name, because he was armed. As soon as he spoke, the door stopped moving, and the sound of faint footsteps could be heard walking off the porch. Against Harriet's wishes, he ran outside only to see no one around. He fired a shot into the woods and yelled for whoever it was to stay away from their house or they'd end up regretting it. That's when he saw it, in the light of the full moon. He saw what looked like a shadow to be 7 feet tall, a emaciated man with unnatural long arms run out from behind the shed and into the woods on all fours at an alarming speed. He was so spooked he almost tripped up the steps running back inside, and before he could even get up the steps, the dog crawled out from under the porch and ran inside the house, where my dog ended up keeping it at night because Harriet couldn't bear the thought of it being out there alone with that thing. That was the last encounter they ever had, as far as I've ever been told. Back in 2008, I was on a hunting trip with my brother up near the Canadian-Michigan border. We had rented a cabin for the week and were looking forward to a nice quiet week until this monster spoiled it all. One night, after a day being in the woods, we were tired and didn't feel like cooking us a meal. So I decided to jump in my truck, drive into town, and get some pop and grub while my brother stayed back to wash up. So I drove down into town by myself and was probably about 45 minutes away, probably not even a solid hour. I talked with the gal at the counter for a few, but I wanted to get back to feed my brother since he gets grouchy when he doesn't have his food, and I didn't want him hacking on me. By the time I headed back, it was getting dark, and by the time I reached the cabin, the sun had already gone down all the way. I hit the road leading to the cabin and could see the silhouette of something big looking into one of the cabin's windows. At first I thought it was Everett, since it looked like it was standing on 2 legs, but this thing looked to be too tall. So then I thought to myself, well, maybe then it's a bear. I didn't want no bear coming around the cabin and causing trouble, so I decided to try to scare him off with my headlights. I aimed my truck in his direction and flipped on my high beams. What I saw then wasn't a bear, it was a monster. When my lights hit it, it spun around and I saw the whole thing. It was only standing on 2 legs. Now, you wanted my description of this thing, and I wish I had my camera handy so I could just take a picture and give it to you, but I wasn't expecting to see any type of monster out there. He was a big guy, like Harry from Harry and the Hendersons, but it wasn't any Sasquatch I was looking at. It looked more like a werewolf. He was more than 7 feet tall, based on how high his head was above the window. He was brown, like a chocolate lab, but the coat was different. It was shaggy like a wolf and had lighter spots on the chest and legs. He had big muscles like he went to the gym. His chest was really wide and his shoulders looked like Brock Lesnar. He had arms that looked like they could kill you easily, and these long-fingered hands with big nails at the ends, and his neck was thick as my waist almost. Even with all that power in his body, that ain't what scared me the most. It was his face. He looked like he was madder than hell about something. Maybe because I interrupted him. Maybe that was just his attitude all the time. Who knows? But those eyes, they will haunt me all of my days. I believe in good and evil, and this thing was pure evil. The light reflected off his eyes like a night predator, and the rest of his face looked just like a wolf. Snout, teeth, nose, ears, all of it looked just like a wolf. When this thing spun around to face me, it pivoted on his back 2 legs and turned just like a human would. First he turned his waist to look at me, then pivoted to face me entirely. My body went numb, and I started to shake. What in the hell is this thing? A werewolf? The only thing I could think of was that I was trying to get to my brother, and he didn't have any idea that this thing was out there. So I started honking my horn and flashing my lights at it, trying to drive it off. Then, that thing put its hands over its eyes, just like a person. It gnashed its teeth at me, and then ran off into the woods. It was still on its hind legs the entire time. I pulled right the hell up to the cabin as close as I could, grabbed my mag light, and took off for the door. I left the truck running, and I was calling out to my brother like a crazed man. Everett ran into the living room, yelling at me, asking what the hell I was doing, and I told him something was out there and we had to leave. Luckily, my brother's a trusting man. 43 years of living with me, he should know when I'm serious. So we grabbed our rifles and mag lights and we took out of there with great haste. As we ran to the truck, we could both hear something big running in the woods next to the cabin, and the loudest growl I've ever heard. The growl almost shook my insides. We tossed the guns into the truck and jumped in. Everett was shining his light into the forest, but he didn't see anything. Then we took off out of there. On the way back into town, I told my brother what I had seen and he just shook his head. I think he was letting it soak in. He looked at me and said, "Arn, I think you saw yourself a werewolf." I looked up at the sky. It wasn't a full moon, so I don't know if that was right. I don't know what we saw that night. We went back during the day a few days later. After going to church, I might add, and praying a lot. We got our stuff and then talked to the gentleman that rented us the cabin and told him what I seen. He swore he never heard of anything like that around there before, but I got the impression he was lying to us. That's why I never really go into the woods unarmed anymore. One day in 2015, me and my family decided to go up into the mountains for the 4th of July. We didn't have a big family. It was just me, my mom, and my 2 siblings. My sister was 3 and my older brother was 17. I was 15 at the time. Me and my brother both shared a tent while my mom and my little sister had a little trailer that only fit one. I never liked this campsite. It was always dark in a way. Like the air wasn't so free. It was all musk or, in a way, tense. Well, we were really deep in the forest area. This campsite was shut down in 2013, so we took the chance to save money and go to an abandoned campsite for the hell of it. We once went there before it shut down. There were no bathrooms, no water, and no one was around. It was nice and quiet. Me and my brother decided to check out the site. When we were there for about 10 minutes, we got away from camp. We came across an old cabin. It was very old and abandoned. Being myself, I wanted to go inside. It took my brother a good 5-minute argue to let me go. When he finally agreed, we headed inside. It was all torn down. It wasn't very small. It was like a regular medium-sized house. It was ruined, though. I noticed one drawing on the wall that somehow stood out from all the others. It was like a bull and a human, long arms, long legs. It had a saying, like, "They are watching, they see you now. Once there's now, yours to suffer." Those words gave me chills. I watched so many scary movies that I just ignored it. It's a very scary looking house. There is always going to be that one creepy artist willing to give it a good scare. After taking a closer look at the artwork, we decided to go upstairs. The cabin was mostly empty. When we got upstairs, it was like a loft. A pair of stairs that led to one huge room. Like the whole room was upstairs. It was completely empty, except there was just one little box in the middle of the room, which was also empty. This is when it gets kind of fuzzy. It had 2 horses on it. I was very curious, so I opened it. To my surprise, there were a couple photos in it. I only remember 3 of the pictures. I know there were more though. One had a picture of a little family. It was black and white. A little girl. She looked like she was from 4 to 6 years old, and she had a big smile. There was a lady holding 2 toddlers. They didn't look like infants. They were definitely old enough to sit up on their own. But they all had huge smiles. Then there was a man. He had a compelling look. He wasn't smiling like the others. He had no hair. He was standing in front of them in a way. Like, I couldn't see the others' outfits because of his shadow. I remember he had an axe in one hand and he was holding the girl's hand. In the background there was a forest like the one that was around the cabin. It looked like to be the same cabin. It had flowers, a little stone path, and more. There wasn't any writing on it, of course. The roof wasn't broken then as well. The other picture was more interesting and way more chilling. It was a picture of the land the camp was now on. I could see the little landmark that told you where you are. In this picture, the man had the little girl on his back. She had the same smile and the guy had the same face as the other picture. There were the little houses and such in the background like a mini town. Behind the man you could see a little pathway of rocks with a red stain on it. I personally thought it was blood. You could see dead animals such as deer, rats, and etc., but I couldn't really tell if they were skinned or not. But it was still really creepy. It's odd. I remember the water being a dark red, but that's about it. I wanted to give these to a local museum, so I stuck them in my dress pocket. Let's just say that was a huge mistake. By the time we got back to the camp, it was dark. I remember eating a hot dog and s'mores, telling scary stories and heading to the tents to catch some Z's. I woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. My tent was, let's say, if I was running, I would be at the side of the mountain. I was walking to find a place to go to the bathroom. When I was about to squat down, I saw something bright. It was like a light behind a tree. When I took a look at it, I started hearing what sounded like chains. I was literally about to pee myself. It really didn't help that I was literally squatting down to go to the bathroom. It looked like a person. I couldn't see anything or any features, but it was a shape, and I could see chains. I think it noticed me. I was shaking dead quiet, my hand still on the rim of my pajama pants. I was shocked. I couldn't move. It started to slowly move backward. It was making light, lighting up the forest as it goes, brighter than any light source. I watched as it got faster and started running up the mountain backwards, like up the hill at almost 90 freaking degrees. So steep you couldn't even climb it with ropes. I was about to crap myself. When it got to the very top, it disappeared. I woke up everyone after I was able to move again. We packed up and left. I threw the pictures out the window, not even caring anymore. My father, mother, and I make frequent trips to the Smoky Mountains and stay in the cabins they have near Pigeon Forge. However, this particular trip still haunts me to this day. About 8 years ago, we stayed in a cabin that had an alarm system. It was already dark outside when we reached the cabin and got settled in. We set the alarm and thought we would watch a movie together. While we were watching the movie, the security system alarm went off. The alarm was only to go off if a door was open. We checked the cabin top to bottom and find nothing out of the ordinary. The next morning, we called the company and rented the cabin to us to see if maybe the alarm system was broken and to have it checked out. Someone came and checked out the system and said that he has been called out to our cabin multiple times within the past month with the same problem. Since it's only the first day at the cabin, I am already feeling a little creeped out. I noticed that there is a book on the table that guests can sign and talk about how much they love the cabin. As I was reading more and more stories, I noticed that many of them mentioned feeling unsafe. Some even mentioned that they found wet footprints on the back deck, where the hot tub is. I told my family about these stories, and they told me they are just trying to tell scary stories and get other guests spooked. I agreed with her and go about our day. The same night, we go to bed like normal. My father slept in the basement of the cabin, I slept on the main floor beside the kitchen, and my mother slept on the top floor. My dad snores so loud that we all sleep far away from each other, including my mom. It was about 2 a.m. in the morning when I am awoken by the fridge door closing. I looked at the bright light from the fridge that was pouring into my room from the crack underneath my closed door. I noticed that the light would come and go as the fridge door seemed to continue to open and close. I assume it was one of my parents leaning on the fridge door trying to decide what they wanted to eat for a late night snack. However, I felt a weird sensation. I just don't know. I didn't even consider to get out of my bed to join in on the snack though. The fridge light disappeared slowly, and I heard footsteps walk away from my bedroom and head in the direction of the steps to go up to my mom's room. The footsteps seemed to stop for a second, then start back up the stairs again. All of a sudden they stop. I assumed that it was my mother and she made it to her room, so I fell back asleep. The next morning I wake up to go directly to my mom and ask what she decided to eat last night. She looked at me and asked, "What?" I told her that I thought she was at the fridge last night opening and closing the fridge because I heard her go back upstairs after a while at around 2 a.m. She looked at me and said, "I thought that was you." At this time in my life, I was known to be up at that time. "I saw you standing at top of the stairs last night around that time. I assumed you were sleepwalking because you looked at me and went back downstairs." So at this point, I start to freak out and become sick to my stomach. The rest of the trip, I slept with my mother at the very top floor. I didn't experience anything else like that for the rest of the trip, and never went anywhere alone. A couple months go by after our trip when my dad tells me he was looking to rent another cabin for a trip. We went to go look at the cabin that we rented out last time, and found out that they had closed that cabin and it is no longer available to rent. Out of curiosity, he did some research to find out that many guests experienced something in that cabin. The complaints ranged from feeling unsafe to people thinking someone was in the cabin that shouldn't have been, to people leaving before their vacation was over. I am not sure what my mother and I had experienced that night in the cabin, but I now know that we aren't the only ones that went through something similar. Thanks for watching this video, guys. If you liked these stories, be sure to hit that like button as it helps this video a lot. If you're new to the Swamp Dweller community, be sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications to never miss a new video. I upload videos almost every single day on all things creepy and anomalous. If you have a story that you'd like to share and hear in a future video, be sure to send it to the email or the website that you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your stories. These stories freaked me out quite a bit, and I hope they freaked you out too. Have you ever experienced something creepy or unexplained in a cabin somewhere deep in the woods? I'd love to hear those stories, send them on in. Many of you guys ask me all the time in the comment section how you can support the channel outside of giving the videos a like and a subscribe. Well, the best way to do that is checking out the merch store here that you see on screen. There's plenty of cool designs ranging from the Park Ranger series all the way down to Swamp Dweller logos. It's much appreciated if you check it out, and I definitely would love to see pictures of you guys wearing your Swamp Dweller merch. So send those in so I can share those in future videos.